Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing well and continuing to stay safe. So, I've been kind of struggling on making this video for a while, but the idea has been brewing in my head. And essentially, what I wanted to talk about was my problems with the game reviews for Dead Cells and kind of the guides that are the most popular. So, there's a lot to this topic, but I did want to preface this by saying that I'm not throwing shade at any YouTuber, I'm not throwing shade at any companies. It may sound like that, but really I'm just talking about something from an overall perspective and using particular examples. So I don't want to see anyone getting upset at any companies or anything like that. This is just more of something that's on my mind that I want to talk about. I don't have any resentment against them, and neither should you. So to get started, if you go on YouTube and search the Dead Cells reviews tag or whatever it is, I'm not going to show any clips just because this is just more of me talking. But really, the core issue lies right when you hit that search, because almost every single review is from a year or 2 years ago, just depending on the time. But they were all in 2018. So either they were back in, like, I think April 2018 or August 2018 or whenever. The actual game was released on consoles for August 2018. That's when the majority of reviews came in. And the only recent example of a review that I've seen has been from the YouTuber Broomstick Gaming, who unfortunately is best known for his drama with IGN, where IGN plagiarized his content. And, he was the victim of a large company taking advantage of a smaller YouTuber. But IGN did the right thing in firing that guy and putting out an actually legitimate review. But shout out to Broomstick Gaming. It was a well done review on the Bad Seed DLC. But he's not really the topic of this video. The topic is more of the fact that the YouTube algorithm is pushing reviews that are a year to 2 years old. And if you know the game, and if you've been around for a while, you'll know exactly what my problem is. But just to spell it out, it's told from a perspective from 1.0. So it's, for those of you who don't know what 1.0 is, currently we're on version 1.8 on Steam and 1.7 on consoles. The reason 1.8 hasn't been released on consoles is fairly unknown, but sometimes there's delays with the updates, and especially given the whole COVID situation, there's probably a lot that's delaying the release for 1.8 on consoles. It'll come. Devs have put out some news on 1.9. I'm not going to talk about it until we actually see it in action, but it looks like 1.9 is going to be a big change. So I'll kind of quick fire every change that's happened since 1.0 up until 1.8, and I'm not going to address every single little change, but this is just more of a quick fire thing. So 1.1 added some mechanical changes as well as custom mode. 1.2 added the Rise of the Giant, so added the Giant, added caverns, added a lot of new weapons and biomes. It was one of the biggest changes ever. 1.3 added the Rampager and some different changes to weapons, especially the oil sword had the biggest change. 1.4 added all the new boss weapons, so that's your flint, light speed, that sort of thing, and just kind of changed the way bosses worked. 1.5 changed the way the biomes worked, especially in terms of curse chests and things like that. Changed the achievement system and had some nerfs and buffs and things like that. And the nerfs and buffs to weapons and skills and mutations are just present throughout Dead Cells. 1.6 was a pretty short update, but kind of changed some stuff with Freeze, added the Ice Shield, and the Meat Skewer had that huge rework, which completely changed the landscape of that weapon. Made it from the worst melee weapon, in my opinion, to one of the best, in my opinion. 1.7 was the Bad Seed DLC, as I mentioned earlier, so new biomes, new boss and the Mama Tick, and some new weapons, things like that, new enemies, obviously. And 1.8 added all the new enemies, and some nerfs to weapons and some buffs, and just general stuff like that. 1.9 looks like it's going to be a big update. We don't know much about it yet. Looks like they're reworking the game's economy and stuff like that. So, my point is, every single version has had some form of significant change that changes the game's output. Changes how you play the game, changes how you see the game. The problem with the reviews is that since they're all told from a 1.0 perspective, it is pretty inaccurate if someone now, especially since the Dead Cells community is still going strong and there's a lot of new players coming in every single update, they'll end up possibly going on one of these reviews, because I think we all have at some point in our lives looked at a review of some product that we want, and they're going to see all this basic gameplay and all this 1.0 gameplay from a game that has had so much more to offer since that. And it gives them such an incomplete view onto the actual game. Not to mention, all the reviews and all the guides, I'll talk about reviews first and then guides later. So all the reviews are told from a 0 BC perspective. And I'm going to say this just to apply to the rest of the video. There's absolutely nothing wrong with being on 0 BC or 1 BC or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 BC. Wherever you're at, that's totally cool. I know a lot of my subscribers are on 0, 1 BC and they come to my channel because of the guides that I put out on weapons and bosses and things like that. And that's awesome. That's totally cool. Thing is, I don't think putting out a review of the entire game when you have such a large audience really gives necessarily a complete picture into what you can experience with the game. For example, if all you're doing in your review is just running through prisoner quarters and promenade with a rusty sword, there's so much more to the game than just that. And if I'm watching this review and I haven't bought the game, that's what I'm going to think the game mostly is. But the beauty of Dead Cells is that there's hundreds, or at least over 100, weapons or skills and mutations and playstyles and things like that. Like, it is such a diverse game. And just to be able to give such a big, high-level overview of the game when there's a lot of subtle nuances, I think does a disservice to the game. And it's very incomplete. And because these reviews are all told from a 0 BC perspective, that likely means, and it almost always means, that you haven't unlocked every single weapon skill and mutation. First off, you don't get a lot of cells on 0 BC, so the likelihood of you getting all your stuff on 0 BC is just not going to happen. You're going to unlock everything when you hit around 3 or 4 BC. When we're just talking 1.0, there was no 5 BC until 1.2, so let's just talk about 1.0. So they haven't unlocked every single little thing yet. So 1.0, the best weapon in the game, arguably, and you can kind of put that up for debate, was the ice bow. It had damage reduction, it pierced enemies, quick fire rate. You could use it on off-color builds. It was fantastic. It was really, really good. But no mention of that in any of the reviews. No mention of the diverse weapons. There's so many different playstyles, even in 1.0. There was ranged, there was melee, there was shields, there's double shields, there's Hokuto's bow builds, there's damage over time builds, which have existed since 1.0. And there's so many different playstyles, and those playstyles have only expanded since 1.0. Like now, like in 1.4, the Assassin's build, which was mainly focused on melee tactics, that got a huge buff. And so melee tactics is a viable playstyle now. Double shields, because there's been more shields added to the game. That's a viable playstyle. And you guys know that you've seen my runs. Like, I play mostly melee. That's my best playstyle. Brutality or tactics or otherwise. Like, that is my best playstyle. But some weapons I like and some weapons I don't like. But the thing is, when I do my 5BC runs, I try to show you guys something different each time because that's just what the game has to offer. I can use what is my favorite build in the game, which is Swift Sword Velocity. I can use that all day long, or Swift Sword Meat Skewer, or some form of Spartan Sandals. I can use some of my favorite builds all day long, but that gets boring for both me and for you. Or maybe not for you, I don't know. But I know it gets boring for me because you play the game the same way every single time. And that's kind of what leads me to my next problem, which is the guides. So, I remember a video from, I think it was a couple years ago, when Dead Cells was first released, and I was struggling on 0BC, and I would make it to Hand of the King. I lost about 7 times. 0BC on 1.0 was pretty hard, honestly. It's about the equivalent to 1.1 nowadays. It's the equivalent to 1BC nowadays. So, this video, it was by a YouTuber called The Game Gurus. I think they're called Legion Gaming now. I'm not entirely sure. The video is deleted, which is part of the reason I'm not using any clips, because I couldn't find that video. But essentially, they were talking on and on and on about how great the Frost Blast was. And yes, in 1.0, the Frost Blast was very good. But again, there was a better freeze weapon out there, at least in my opinion, than the Ice Bow. And there's a couple things to this. So, Ice Bow, faster fire rate, had ammo, which Frost Blast didn't have ammo, but it was damage reduction, and it was quick, and then you could hit multiple enemies at once from far away. So, I mean, most people liked Ice Bow better than the Frost Blast. It was basically the entire meta for 1.0. So, just that damage reduction, honestly. Damage reduction was a huge part of the meta in 1.0. But here's the thing. By talking on and on and on about the Frost Blast and never even mentioning the Ice Bow, what that told me was that video was told from a low BC perspective, because they hadn't unlocked the ice bow yet. Because the Frost Blast, I think, was always unlocked. At least now it's always unlocked. Whereas the ice bow, you actually have to spend the cells and go unlock it. So putting out a tips and tricks guide and how to beat dead cells and talking about the Frost Blast and not the ice bow, I think that's kind of an issue. And I think if you're going to put out a guide, you got to know the game in order to put out a guide, because otherwise you risk putting out bad information out there. You risk putting useless information out there, which is even worse. Because at least, and I'm going to stick up for Legion Gaming / Game Gurus, whatever the hell they want to call themselves. I'm going to stick up for them because, first of all, they run a pretty good YouTube channel. But the other thing is that at least they played the game enough to know that the Frost Blast is good. Like, I disagree in saying that it's the best thing out there and that you have to use it, which I'll talk about in a minute, but at least they played the game enough. Now, a more terrible example, and I use the word terrible, and I'm kind of exaggerating a little bit, but a much worse example would be GameSpot's tips and tricks and stuff we wish we knew about Dead Cells video. It was a big problem because the information that they gave was extremely useless. I'll give an example. One of the things that they said was how you can turn in cells for blueprints and how you can get money from killing enemies and stuff like that, and how you can move around platforms and switch out weapons. And obviously I'm not giving every single thing in the video, but that stuff you figure out within the first 2 minutes of the game. If I'm searching up on YouTube, I'm struggling with the game, and I search up on YouTube Dead Cells guides, I probably already played the game. And the proof is in the pudding, because a lot of my subscribers have come from, most likely, my Rhythm and Bazooki guide, or my Hand of the King guide, or my Spartan Sandals guide. Those are my 3 biggest guides. That's probably what everyone came from. Or my Shields guide. That's where the majority of people on my channel have come from. And so I talk about a variety of different things with those guides. And, point is, people will search up guides because they're struggling with the game. And so talking about useless stuff like, oh, you can kill enemies and get gold. Like, that's stuff I'll figure out within, like, a minute of playing the game. I kill one enemy and then I get cells and gold. Yeah, I've already figured it out. By the time you hit Promenade, which is the only level you can get to on your first playthrough, you're going to figure out that you can turn in cells for blueprints because the game tells you. These guides, they're incomplete. And they're not good because of the fact that they're giving useless information out. And yes, you can certainly point out flaws with my guides. Like, my speaking isn't the best sometimes. Sometimes I stutter a lot. And sometimes I don't approach every single angle possible. But at least I can give you guys enough information based off of 2 years of high-level gameplay to the fact that, okay, yes, I may miss something here and there, but at least I'm giving you much more of an overview onto something than a lot of other channels. I'm not saying that, you should subscribe to my channel and don't subscribe to GameSpot or anything like that, but what I'm saying, is it GameSpot or GameStop? I think it's GameSpot. GameStop is the store. But, so I'm not saying that I'm a better YouTuber than anybody, but what I'm saying is that at least I know enough about the game to be able to talk about it more in depth. And because of that, I think that, not just me, but other Twitch streamers out there can at least talk about it from a perspective that is much more useful to a player who is starting out and struggling than a GameSpot guide that talks about getting gold in the game. And let me give you an example really quick of someone who was awesome in their guides. So there's a Twitch streamer named Loot or Die. That's LOOT_OR_DIE. Great guy. He's a very wholesome guy. So he has a bot. When someone's struggling with the game, he puts up the bot, and it's like just basically a text. It's basically a text comment, and then it has very basic overview into what to say during the game, or what to do during the game. And it's short, it's sweet, it's to the point, and it's very useful because it's stuff that you may not realize when you're first starting out the game and you're struggling with Hand of the King on 01 BC and you see his input, and that's helpful. And then you think about that when you play, and then you're like, oh, okay, this is what I need to do now. And he's a high-level player. He's a very, very good player. I do recommend you check him out. But that's an example. And the other problem with these guides and what they do is that because you're focusing in on Frostblast, even if all they did was talk about the Ice Bow the entire time, right? Let's just say they did that. Let's just say they got that information correctly. Now, here's the other problem, is you're focusing in on one weapon in telling someone how to get good. And there was a post several months ago on Reddit about the 4BC cheese build. Basically, you cheese your way to get to 4BC. And the build was heavy crossbow, ramparts, or punishment. It was one of the two. And then the powerful grenade, and I believe the giant's whistle. It's a very good build. I'm not discrediting that. And that can probably get you up to 4BC. Problem is, you're kind of screwed when you get to 4BC because you've been face tanking the entire time with that build, and you've developed a lot of bad habits because you have stuck yourself with one singular playstyle, and when you get to 4BC, you kind of screw yourself by melees. Because every hit you take is melees, and you're pretty much dead within the first two biomes. And that is something I have seen from a lot of players that have come up to me and been like, hey, like, you know, I've been trying this one build because that's what got me to 4BC, and now it's not working. Why is that not working? That's why it's not working. It's because you haven't necessarily taken the time to be able to experiment with different weapons and skills, and I think it's this fear of losing in the game, this fear of failure, this fear of dying, when the entire thing of Dead Cells is that you're going to die a lot. That's the reality. Even if you run that cheese build the entire time, you're still going to die a lot in the game. I'm a 5BC player. I've been a high-level player for at least over a year now. And I can at least safely say that I die on about half my runs. And, you know, there's Twitch streamers out there that have win streaks and stuff like that. I'm not a Twitch streamer. It's one of the reasons I don't stream on Twitch. But most 5BC players die a lot still. And that's the reality, is that you die, you think about why you died, and then you just move on. And then you try to not screw up the next time. Dead Cells, almost every single time when you die, it's something that you did wrong in the game. There's very little RNG in the game. The RNG really only comes with the weapons and the item drops and things like that. Or I guess level generation, so stuff like challenge rifts and stuff like that. But if you die, it's going to be your fault about 95% of the time. So what you do is that you think about what happened and what you could have done better, and then you roll with it the next time, using a different build, using different sorts of stuff. It's why I give the advice to new players is don't use custom mode until you've beaten 5EC, because if you use custom mode, you're probably going to only run the same build every single time to get yourself to 5BC, and then if you ever want to use something else, you're not going to be able to. Whereas if you try a variety of builds, you try a variety of playstyles, yeah, you're going to die a lot more often initially, but later on, when you've reached 4 or 5BC, you're much better prepared to take on the game and the hard stuff. But that's what a lot of these guides that are focused on 0BC gameplay miss, because they haven't unlocked a lot of things. So when all you're doing is talking about Frost Blast or one particular weapon like the Twin Daggers, then the problem really comes in the fact that you haven't seen a lot of the game. And so you're not going to be able to talk about what's good and what's not. And granted, you know, I have a lot of controversial opinions in this game. Like, I think Spartan Sandals is one of the best weapons in the entire game, and I mean that with no irony whatsoever, because I think it's fantastic. Meat Skewer is possibly my favorite weapon in the entire game. I don't think it's the best, but it's my personal favorite. And I think that Explosive Crossbow and Nutcracker are the two worst weapons in the game. Those are fairly controversial opinions, all of them. But at least I can explain why I have that opinion from my personal playstyle. My playstyle is very chaotic. It's very balls to the wall, and Nutcracker and Explosive Crossbow are very much not that. Whereas stuff like Spartan Sandals and Meat Skewer and Swift Sword and Sadist Stiletto are, or Fire Blast, or a lot of tactics builds. They're very fast. They're very balls to the wall and crazy and chaotic, and that's my personal playstyle. That's what works for me. Whereas you take another Twitch streamer that I recommend, King DKC, it's KING DKC up on Twitch. He plays a much more defensive, safer playstyle, and that allows him to get a lot of wins. He's an amazing, amazing player, but he focuses a lot on shields and survival builds that allow him to be really good at that game. That's his playstyle. That's what works for him. But neither of us would have figured out what our playstyles were if we had used the exact same build from 0BC up until 4BC, because that wouldn't have been what works. We wouldn't have been able to figure that out, or we would have figured it out much later than when we actually did. And so I would not have a channel right now if I had done that whole heavy crossbow build up until 4BC. The reason I have a channel is because I've used every single weapon. I've used every single skill, every single mutation, every single whatever. I've been through every biome. I fought all the bosses on all the boss cells. So I have seen almost all of the game. So I feel like I can talk about, and I feel like I can do builds. I feel like I can play the game from a high level perspective, and not just in terms of skill level, but in terms of knowledge of the game. So when I give out information to you guys and I do guides, it comes from that perspective of having used a weapon thoroughly. Maybe not all the way, but at least thoroughly, or enough to a point where I can explain how it works and how to use it and what to use it with. An example would be my meat skewer guide. A lot of people didn't know that the meat skewer got that buff in 1.6 until I put out the video, because I got a few comments saying that, or, well, not comments, but I had some reception saying that, hey, I didn't know meat skewer was that good. Spartan Sandals, one of my more controversial guides, where, you know, some people were saying, okay, I'm not a big fan of the Spartan Sandals, but I didn't know that you could do this and that. And that's cool. That's awesome. That's why I do those guides. I'm not doing the guides to basically tell you what to think. I'm doing the guides because I want to show off how good something is, or the potential of something. I did a whole guide on synergy because I didn't see anything like that on YouTube when I searched up Dead Cells guides, because I saw that nobody was talking about the importance of synergy, which is arguably the crux of high-level gameplay, is how well your weapons synergize with each other. And I didn't realize that no one had made a guide on that if I didn't get a comment asking me to do a guide on that. It's just stuff like that, right? And I think really my core problem is that these guides and these reviews are so incomplete in their information, and they don't talk about it from a more high-level perspective, or a high BC perspective. I'm not saying that you can never talk about the game from 0 BC. That is absolutely not what I'm saying. What I'm instead saying is that I think if you're going to put out a review, if you're going to talk about the game on a platform that hundreds of thousands of people can watch, or even hundreds of people can watch, then I think it's important to really know what you're talking about. Because you can be on 2 or 3 BC and still know what you're talking about in the game. Like, you can still talk about certain weapons. You can still talk about how to get better at the game. But I think if you've only played 0 BC and that's all you're going to talk about, then you're missing out on giving players tips and tricks for 1 BC, 2, 3, 4, 5, because the stuff that works on 0 BC may not work for 1 to 5 BC. And putting advice that's completely useless, like, oh, you can get cells in tournament for blueprints, like, that does nothing. Instead, that energy could be used to talk about how to get better at the game, and really the honest reality that you're going to die a lot in this game. That's the last thing I want to talk about, because I know I'm kind of rambling a little bit, is it's fine to die in this game. I don't know why there's this fear over, like, failing in this game. Like, it's Dead Cells, and the longest a run's going to be is about an hour and a half. It's not like those old Super Nintendo games where you would play for hours and hours, and then you would lose, and then you have to go back to the beginning, and then you have to play for hours and hours again. Dead Cells is a pretty short game, all things considered, so if you die, you go back to the beginning, and you just play for another hour, and then you die and you go back, but you get better each time. Each death is a learning experience, and I think it's this attitude that we shouldn't fail, we shouldn't ever fail, and then we shouldn't learn from our mistakes, when that's not true. There's no consequence. There's no real-world consequence to dying in Dead Cells. The worst thing that happens is that you have to start over, but you get better. And you learn what not to do with certain enemies. You learn what not to do in certain situations. You think about why you died. And I've put a couple videos lately of me dying, and then I talk about why I died. Is it because I'm not good with a certain weapon, like the explosive crossbow? Or is it because, you know, I may have dodged the wrong way, or I miscalculated something? Like, I had an Assassin's build run on Tactics, and I used the Ram rune on the Guardian Knight, but it didn't die, and so I ignored it, and then when it got back up, it kind of did this little spinny thing, and I died, because I wasn't watching it, and I wasn't paying attention. That's my mistake, but I learned, and now I'm more careful with Guardian Knights. I learned that 2 months ago, and I've been on 5BC for over a year. I can still learn from this game, and you can too. It just takes that willingness to learn and willingness to make mistakes. Like, you can watch my guides all day long, that's great, but the way to get better at this game is by diversifying your builds, diversifying your playstyle, and really allowing yourself to die a lot in this game, and forgive yourself for not playing well. And in life in general, it's okay to fail. It's all about that growth mindset and that learning experience. So I hope you got something out of this. If you disagree, that's cool. You can always leave a comment. We can have a conversation about it. But as far as me playing Dead Cells, I'm kind of bored with the game lately, honestly, and it's nothing to do with Dead Cells. It's just me. I've been playing a lot of Mario U Deluxe on the Switch, so trying to get all the star coins, do all the challenges and stuff like that. That's going to take me a while, and I'm pretty much going to make social commentary the main focus of the channel from here on out. You'll see me occasionally put out a Dead Cells video, but probably not for a little bit, just because I don't feel like playing it right now. But I did want to get this off my chest a little bit, so thank you guys again, and I'll see you in the next one. Have a great night, everybody, and stay safe out there.